And this morning, we are not even halfway through April, but according to a group that tracks gun violence, this is now the 14th mass shooting in the U.S. this month alone. Savannah?
All right, Morgan Chesky, thank you. We have breaking news this morning. We are going to pause one moment and allow our stations across the country to join us.
From NBC News, this is a special report. Here's Savannah Guthrie and Hoda Kotb.
And good morning to those just joining us here in New York. We have breaking news from Buckingham Palace this morning. Prince Philip, the husband of Queen Elizabeth, the Duke of Edinburgh, a fixture of British life for decades, has passed away at the age of 99, just weeks before his 100th birthday. We just received a statement from the palace. It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince of Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. Further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family joined with people around the world in mourning his loss. That coming out just moments ago, Hoda.
It did, yeah. He was 99 years old. In fact, he was due to celebrate a birthday, his 100th birthday, coming up in June. Of course, Philip had largely withdrawn from public life in recent years, and that was due to failing health. He was 5 years older than the Queen. He was her constant companion, her closest confidant. Their marriage was started back in 1947. They've been married, think about this, for 73 years.
And imagine all that they have gone through together and how they've seen the world change from that particular vantage point. Let's go to NBC's Matt Bradley, who is in London for us this morning with this breaking news. Matt, good morning.
Good morning. This is a devastating news for the royal family and for Britons throughout the country. Of course, as you mentioned, the prince was only just a couple of weeks shy of his 100th birthday, and this was a life filled with pain and joy. He saw so much of the 20th century, so much history, and now, of course, it ended with the royal family in the midst of so much scandal and so much of an effort to reinvent itself. And you know, Prince Philip, of course, was a major part of the royal family's own reinvention throughout his lifetime. He really brought to the royal family a sense of reaching out to the public, of actually reaching out and being less of an aloof royal family and more of a family that was just a family. And in the end of the day, that's what we're seeing today. A family that is going through a tragedy, one that has, in just the recent past, gone through very, very public turmoil. And for the next couple of weeks, I think we're going to see a lot more sympathy, a lot more people who are going to be looking at the royal family as just that, as not just an institution, not just a part of the Constitution, and not just fodder for tabloids, but as a grieving entity that really has to deal with its own struggles, guys.
Well, he was certainly the patriarch of that family. We don't know the particular cause of his death, but Hoda, as we know, he's been in ill health for some time. He received the COVID vaccine back in January.
Right.
But unfortunately, it was expected around the royal family that this may come to pass sooner than anyone would have hoped.
He was hospitalized, I remember, he was hospitalized for a while, and then he was released about 3 weeks ago, and I think people were wondering, well, he's released, is he better or not? And
there's a big celebration that had been planned for his 100th birthday on June 10th, and I think there was a lot of hope that perhaps he could hang on until then, but it wasn't to be.
Yeah, Prince Philip's tireless support was a mainstay of the Queen's reign, the longest in the history of the British monarchy. NBC's Keir Simmons has a look at his long life of duty and devotion.
This is how the world knew him, standing by his beloved wife, the Queen, her loyal and lifelong companion. But from the beginning, life conspired to make Prince Philip his own man. He was born in Greece, into that country's royal family, and exiled with them when he was still a small child. A Spartan education in northern Scotland moulded a tough-minded achiever. He saw action on several battleships during World War II, a brilliant and brave naval officer. His 1947 wedding to Elizabeth lifted the spirits of post-war Britain. The next year, Prince Charles was born. 3 more children would follow. But Philip brusque style and numerous gaffes made headlines at home and abroad, making a racist remark about the Chinese, killing a tiger, an endangered species, on a trip to India. His defense, some of his actions and comments were taken out of context. More recently, the Duke finally turned in his driver's license at age 97 following a car crash that injured 2 people and caused his Land Rover to overturn. But over time, Philip gained respect as an honest broker within his family, even as his children lunged from divorce to tragedy. He became an inspiration for the younger royals. His greatest achievement was simply being there for his wife, the Queen.
Without the Duke in her life, one can only imagine that it will take its toll on the Queen, because for so many years he has been her strength and stay, her rock, her friend, her advisor.
He lived to see his grandson Prince William's marriage to Kate Middleton in 2011, celebrated the birth of his great-grandson, the third in line to the throne, Prince George, and was there for the wedding of Prince Harry to Meghan Markle. At age 96, after more than 22,000 solo public appearances, Prince Philip retired from royal duties. His legacy, a lifetime of service to his nation and his wife, the Queen. Keir Simmons, NBC News, London.
And just in the last few moments, Buckingham Palace announcing that Prince Philip has passed away at the age of 99. And we expect more word from the palace in the coming hours. But at the moment, they just said that he died peacefully at home in Windsor Castle. Let's bring in Daisy McAndrew. She's a journalist and royal commentator. And Daisy, unfortunately, this had been somewhat expected as Prince Philip was in failing health for some time now.
Yes, that's true. And as you were just saying a few minutes ago, he had been in hospital for a number of weeks. He had been transferred from one hospital to another to have what we would describe as a minor procedure. We understood it to be on his heart, which has given him trouble over the last few years. And then, of course, he was released from hospital just a couple of weeks ago and taken home. That was the last public sight of Prince Philip. He was seen in the back of that car going home. And of course, yes, it's not a huge surprise that he has passed away, but it also, as you were saying, his 100th birthday was coming up very, very soon, just in a few weeks' time, and he would have been the first consort, the first partner of a reigning monarch to have reached such an extremely old age, an impressive milestone. So there will be sadness about that, but of course much more. There'll be celebration, I think, of his life.
Would you put this in context for us a little bit, Daisy, if you wouldn't mind? Because I think a lot of people, at least on this side of the pond, we know of the Queen, we know of Prince, we know of all the princes, but when you hear about Prince Philip, you wonder just what will that mean? What will that loss mean to England?
It will be a big shock, because if you think about it, anybody in this country who's over, let's say, the age of 70 has only known the consort as Prince Philip. So that's pretty much the majority of the country who have become very accustomed to this very, very stable man being at the right-hand side of the reigning monarch, of the Queen. And of course, we know that she has entirely relied on him. Yes, in public, she walks ahead. She gets all the fanfare. She gets the limelight. But she has spoken many, many times, and all their close friends say he is much more than just a right-hand man. He has been by her side, helping her make decisions, helping her become the monarch, the longest-serving monarch she has been. He was a very, very proud man. So I think when he first became the monarch's consort, it was a difficult role for him to do. He always thought he would be the head of his household. And then it turned out, as things turned out, that he wasn't. But he did forge a role for himself over the years. He had lots of involvement with charities that he set up that helped youngsters, the Duke of Edinburgh's awards, and so on. So he did have his own purposes in life. But equally, he never gave lots of interviews, very much the old school of the royal family.
But Daisy, what about inside? You know, it's always, when we talk about the royal family, we always have to keep in mind these dual dynamics going on. You have the royal family, that's an institution, the monarchy, and then you have a family. And what was his role in terms of keeping the family together as the patriarch? as obviously we've seen the ebbs and flows, the highs and lows that this family, like any family, has gone through over the years. What was his role?
Well, in fact, I just said he wasn't the head of his family. What I meant was publicly, outward-looking, privately within their own family. He very much was the head of the family. He very much took the decisions and was very, very close to some members of his family. And I think Prince Harry is one of those members. He's had a tricky relationship with Prince Charles over the years. They're very, very different personalities. Prince Philip is much more of the gung-ho type, military royal, very upstanding, very brave, very stiff upper lip. Prince Charles has always been more of a sensitive soul, as I'm sure many of your viewers will know, deeply unhappy at school, more spiritual perhaps. But then his other three children, Anne, Andrew and Edward, he's had very different relationships with those three as well, very close to Anne. She's probably the closest to him in personality, a real get on with it, carry on as you were type of personality, very sporty. He's very, very sporty person, Prince Philip, totally obsessed with ritual and exercise and keeping fit, a very light drinker, gave up smoking on the eve of his wedding, allegedly because Princess Elizabeth, the future queen, told him to. So a very, very disciplined man.
All right. Well, Daisy, we want to thank you for your insight, your expertise there. Now, joining us is British historian Andrew Roberts. We're coming on again this morning, breaking news that Prince Philip has died. It was just announced by Buckingham Palace this morning at 7 o'clock. And the last we had heard about Prince Philip was that he was in the hospital, was released about 3 weeks later. And we were pointing out this morning, I would imagine this did not come as a huge surprise to folks.
No, it didn't. He'd had also an infection 10 years ago, which hospitalized him, and again about 5 years ago. So his health hasn't been perfect, but he is, of course, or was, 99 years old, which in itself is a tremendous and, as you just heard, record-breaking thing for the royal family almost.
Can you kind of give us your perspective from history of how Prince Philip figures in? I mean, it's such an interesting course of history that they have witnessed together. Engaged in 1947. She was Princess Elizabeth at the time. Her father died. Suddenly she's thrust into being the monarch. And he's in this role that, experts such as yourself say at first did not necessarily fit that well, that he had to go through that transition period of how to be as they say, consort to the monarch and be in this supporting role as a man in that era. How difficult was that?
It was quite difficult at first. Yes, you're right. I mean, he was always brought up very much to be a leader. He was a prince of Greece and Denmark. He had been a war hero. He was ready to take command of his vessel. And then, of course, King George VI dies. And instead of being an admiral, which is what ultimately he was going to do in the Royal Navy, he had to carry on for the next half century and longer, stepping 2 steps behind someone else. Luckily, it was a genuine love match. They adored one another, and he respected and admired his wife. But nonetheless, it was never that easy to always be 2 steps behind the center of attention, as it were.
He had 4 children: Prince Charles, Princess Anne, Prince Andrew, and Prince Edward. And I just remember the image of when he was coming out of the hospital, and Prince Charles got very emotional in that moment. And it's rare that you got to see the son and father bonds like on display. And I found that striking.
Yes, he was a loving father. He was very, very different, and I think it's tremendously important to make this point, especially to an American audience, very different from the character that is portrayed in The Crown, which is very much a fictionalized version of the royal family, and one can frankly ignore all of it when it comes to the actual historical Prince Philip, who was a very different person. He was a loving father, as I say. He was somebody who all his children looked up to him immensely, as well as the rest of the nation, of course.
And Andrew, I mean, we can't help but be in our present and know that the royal family has been in going on, or whether he was shielded from it as he was in the hospital during that bombshell interview. But how do you think he would have felt about that? Do you have any information about what he knew of it, what he was aware of?
I don't know, and there's no point really in speculating too much about these things, because one can always get it wildly wrong. If he was cognizant of the interview, he would have, of course, discussed it with Her Majesty the Queen, and it's very unlikely that Her Majesty would have put out that statement that she did without Prince Philip concurring in it. So I think we can assume that that he was very much on board with the overall family's response, which was that very short piece saying that that memories differ, that Harry will always be loved, and that they're going to investigate the allegations made against the royal family.
How close were Prince Philip and Harry? Were they very tight?
They were, yes, and I think Prince Harry will be devastated by this. Of course, he knew it was going to come, but nonetheless, he was close to his grandfather. They had the Royal Marines, of course, in common. It was Prince Philip, who was the Captain General of the Royal Marines, who then handed it on to Prince Harry with the words, "Don't screw it up." and then, of course, Prince Harry has had to give up the Captain Generalcy of it. So, so in a sense, he didn't really take his grandfather's words to heart enough, perhaps.
And Andrew, Prince Philip is often credited with helping to move the monarchy into a more modern era, especially in those early years, and trying to maintain its relevance by updating some of the ways it interacted with the world. Would you agree with that, and what impact did that have?
Very, very much so, yes. No, that's a very important point. It was in 1968 that he created the concept of the royal family being I suppose what we call today a soap opera kind of family, in that they allowed a documentary to be made for the first time where they were relaxed, they were on holiday, they were filmed up in Scotland at a barbecue. And they were being treated, therefore, for the first time in history as being a sort of natural family. And that, it was hoped, would make them more popular, of course. Not that they were unpopular in the late 1960s, but nonetheless, it would make them more approachable, perhaps, is the better word. And that was something that was very much down to him.
As I turn to Daisy McAndrew, also with us, a royal commentator and journalist, one thing that was pointed out to me was that, you know, one silver lining of this last year and the pandemic is that actually the Queen and Prince Philip would have spent a lot more time together, really special months and final year together at Windsor Castle, whereas in other circumstances they may have been in different locations more often. Yeah. What do you know about that? And talk about their relationship. I think you said it was a love match, which we can't take for granted when we're talking about a match that was made 1947 among royals.
Exactly. I think you're so right about the last year. Of course, for so many people around the world, it's been incredibly difficult being either working from home, losing your jobs, losing friends and families. But of course, for some people, it has meant some enforced time with their family, which is something that the royal family don't get very much, very often, because they are doing so many public engagements. So really, since lockdown was announced here in the UK last March, obviously, both the Queen and Prince Philip have been pretty much confined to quarters, confined to home, and as you said, have spent an awful lot more time together than they would have done. It absolutely was a love match. She's always maintained, and her close friends have maintained, that pretty much from the time they first met when she was just a teenager, she was pretty obsessed with him, or sotted with him. And it's almost difficult for those of us who just know him as he has been for the last couple of decades to realise he was incredibly handsome and dashing when he was a young man. So many of the society pages at the time talked about this sort of Greek god type character, very tall, very upright, brushed back, blonde hair, very twinkly, very, very charming. And of course, many people have spoken, and Keir did in his piece, in his package for you there, about the Duke's gaffes over the years. But of course, one thing that they always showed was a human side. This wasn't a robotic personality. This was somebody who was constantly cracking jokes. Yes, some of them were deeply inappropriate, but people who met him, people who knew him, found him very, very engaging company and not sort of stuffed shirt that you might have seen.
Yeah. Daisy, let me pause you right there because Boris Johnson is addressing the British public. Let's listen.
Inspired the lives of countless young people, and at literally tens of thousands of events, he fostered their hopes and encouraged their ambitions. We remember the Duke for all of this, and above all, for his steadfast support for Her Majesty the Queen. Not just as her consort, by her side every day of her reign, but as her husband, her strength and stay of more than 70 years. And it is to Her Majesty and her family that our nation's thoughts must turn today, because they have lost not just a much-loved and highly respected public figure, but a devoted husband and a proud and loving father, grandfather, and in recent years, great-grandfather. Speaking on their golden wedding anniversary, Her Majesty said that our country owed her husband a greater debt than he would ever claim or we shall ever know. And I'm sure that estimate is correct. So we mourn today with Her Majesty the Queen. We offer our condolences to her and to all her family. And we give thanks as a nation and a kingdom for the extraordinary life and work of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh.
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson just outside 10 Downing Street in London as the news has just broken there and here. 7 o'clock Eastern time, the afternoon London time, with the announcement that Prince Philip has died at the age of 99, married to the Queen for 73 years. And we can see some of the activity going on in Buckingham Palace. It appears that is the official statement that was released, and now, as tradition has it, they're posted physically on the gates of Buckingham Palace. The news that perhaps was expected for the Duke being 99 years old, but certainly met with heartbreak, especially because he was, on June 10th was to turn 100 years old, a celebration planned, and he, by all accounts, so hoped to mark that milestone.
Yeah, he was always so vibrant. I mean, they talk about him driving a car until he was 97 years old, and this is someone who we always saw front and center right next to the Queen. And, it's funny, we talk about the royal family and the prince dying, but this is also a wife who's lost her husband on this day, husband of 70-plus years. And there's probably, a lot of mourning going on.
I was thinking of that very thing as we turned to NBC's Matt Bradley in London when Prime Minister Johnson was talking about, it's the Queen, but she's the wife that lost her husband, and a husband who has been by her side since she was a teenager. The two literally grew up together under the most extraordinary of circumstances.
Circumstances that are really hard for the rest of us to ever identify with, because, as an American living here in London, and I've lived here for the past 5 years, I mean, it's hard to imagine how the royal family really has found themselves in these circumstances. They're so singular in their experience that it's so different for them. They really are a part of the Constitution, as Boris Johnson, that's why he was alluding to this. That's why they're in such a complicated circumstance. Guys?
Matt Bradley, thank you. We're going to stand by. We're going to have the latest on this breaking news throughout the morning. Most of you will return now to the Today Show. I'm Savannah Guthrie alongside Hoda Kotb. This has been an NBC News special report on the passing of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, at the age of 99. And good morning, everybody. It's 7:30 here on a...
All right, David Agus, thank you very much for clearing it up. This is a special report from CBS News. Now to breaking news from London. Buckingham Palace has just confirmed that Prince Philip, the husband of Queen Elizabeth, has died at the age of 99. He was recently, as you know, released from the hospital after a heart operation. Mark Phillips has this story.
His role in life was to walk one step behind the Queen. But even back there, Prince Philip was able to carve out his own reputation and role in history. Elizabeth was the shop window of what Philip famously called the royal firm, but he reputedly ran the business's back rooms.
So, essentially, the Queen has always worn the crown.
Giles Brandreth ran one of Philip's charities for years.
And Prince Philip was allowed to wear the trousers. That's the way it worked.
Philip had been born into the Greek royal family in 1921 and was educated and had a naval career in Britain. And by luck, or many think by royal design, he was chosen to escort the young Princess Elizabeth on a tour. The Queen's cousin, Margaret Rhodes, recalled the impression he made in a conversation before she died several years ago.
And of course, Prince Philip was the most utterly good-looking Viking god.
Viking god?
Well, he really was so good-looking.
A dream royal romance became a spectacularly successful royal marriage. She provided the continuity and the smiles. Philip provided the support and, from time to time, the controversy. Some thought he was a gaffe-prone founder. Originals in Australia, whether they still threw spears at each other. He told British students in China they would get slitty eyes if they stayed there too long. Closer to home, he once asked Scottish driving instructors how they kept their students off the sauce long enough to pass the test.
He just said what he felt. He was very funny. Prince Philip was the man who said, if ever you see a man opening the car door for his wife, it's either a new car or a new wife. He was a shrewd observer.
And a shrewd operator, credited with diffusing the great royal crisis around Princess Diana's funeral. It was Philip who convinced Princes William and Harry to walk behind their mother's coffin when they didn't want to. "I'll walk with you," he said. Harry has since said it was a traumatic experience no child should have to endure, but it was a lesson in royal duty. Royals don't gush, except sometimes. We don't know what Philip thought of the Queen's tribute to him on their golden wedding anniversary, but it could serve as his epitaph.
He has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
The royal family made the announcement in a tweet this morning. It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen has announced the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. He passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. We're joined now by Charlie Daggett in London. Charlie, it was quite a life.
It was quite a life. You know, he was known to be such a character here in the UK. As the Queen had put it multiple times, she always described him as her rock. Sort of the quiet strength behind the throne, known for his personality, his sense of humor, his sometimes inappropriate comments, and his sense of humor, and that was part of parcel of who he was. But he was also known to have the matriarch of this family, but he served as the patriarch of the family when it comes to the royal family itself. But we were always on guard for, you know, Philip's gaffes, Prince Philip's gaffes, what he may have had to say, and he was very quick-witted, and as I said, at times inappropriate, as Mark pointed out in that obituary. He just left the hospital on March 16th. He had been in the hospital for a month. He underwent heart surgery. So, you know, there were hopes, of course, that he was going to reach his 100th birthday, which is June 10th. There were big celebrations planned for that. But, yes, we got news just moments ago from the palace.
I know, Charlie, it's so sorry. I'm so sad to hear this news. I know, as you pointed out, he was at the hospital, and when he was released, people were feeling really good. They were thinking he's getting better. Listen, I know when you're 99, it's always, you never know how much longer you have, but people were feeling pretty good when he left the hospital. Have you heard anything about exactly what happened? Was it just natural causes? And I realize it's still early in this story. It's just breaking there.
Yeah, Gail, you know, I think we all had a sense of relief when a person as old as he is goes to the hospital, 99 years old, and then spends about a month in the hospital and undergoes a heart procedure. You know, you're not thinking it's going to turn out great. So we were all surprised, pleasantly surprised, when he left. As you saw in his own steam, he was in the back of a car sitting up. You know, it wasn't an ambulance that brought him away. In terms of, you know, whether they knew he was nearing the end and he'd be more comfortable, you know, passing away at home, we don't know. We don't know exactly what he succumbed to or when. We just get that statement from the palace just moments ago, so we don't know the details yet. But yes, as we know it, passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle.
Yeah.
Hey, Charlie, you know, it says in the announcement that the royal family put out that the website is temporarily unavailable as they make changes, and in addition they note, and I guess more information will be forthcoming, that they will join people around the world in mourning this loss. I'm curious, is there a playbook or official process that will unfold in the days ahead? Has something been triggered that we can point to?
Well, it's a good question, Tony. There is, and there certainly was, but in these days of COVID, everything has had to been changed, and everything has been sort of marginalized. So in terms of what we can expect over the next 2 days, I don't know yet. The palace hasn't given us a play-by-play. It would have been a state ceremony, obviously, for Prince Philip. I don't know exactly the timings for that or the level of involvement. But yes, he will be certainly mourned here, and people will want to show their mourning. So there'll have to be something to mark his passing and his funeral. But exactly what, I haven't got the details of.
Charlie, we talk about what a colorful character he was. I recall back in the mid-1980s when I was based in London, going to a coaching contest. He loved to ride, the prince loved to ride horse and carriages in competition. And he was on the course that day in competition, and you could hear him cursing all the way around the course very loudly. I mean, it was, you don't forget something like that.
That's part of the charm. That's part of the charm.
You just didn't quite know what he was going to say.
No, he was never shy. He was a character. And as you saw from those earlier pictures, you know, when he was younger, he was quite the playboy. I mean, he was really the heartthrob in the early days. My wife and her mother, more appropriately, would talk about how handsome he was and how charming he was. And yes, part of the charm was, you know, in these days of correct political correctness, I have to add there, he was politically incorrect, and we're always waiting for what he had to say. And he, you know, I mean, he was pretty vulgar and cutting with some journalists, the ones he didn't like. He made known, because, you know, microphones were everywhere. So, you know, he was known to be a man who painted outside the lines. Nobody could really tell him what to do except Her Majesty, and she wasn't about to do that. So really, he was a law unto himself, and beloved for that. Here in the UK. Of course, when he made these inappropriate statements that you saw in Mark's obituary there, it is offensive and it's unacceptable. But it is who he was, and he didn't change for anybody.
And let's talk about their long marriage, Charlie. They'd been together for well over 70 years. That in itself is extraordinary.
It's legendary.
Yes.
And I think, you know, not just 70 years, but really 70 years on the throne. You know, he has been there with the Queen with this unprecedented amount of time right beside her. So he has had a duty, a sense of responsibility, not just being married for that long, but being married to the Queen and having that official role and that duty, being under the spotlight, having to go through the situation with Princess Diana dying, having to be the peacemaker. Even recently, you know, with Prince Harry and Prince William, Prince Charles, and everything that's gone on with the royal family, he has been involved. I know that for a fact. As of about a year ago, when they were talking about Megxit, as it were, we know that he was part of those conversations. So he's a very, very dynamic individual, and one who remained dynamic right up to the end.
And he had to play a very unusual role, Charlie. I mean, he's not the monarch, he's the spouse of the monarch, but in many ways he's the head of the family. So he has this very fine line he has to walk sometimes.
Well, exactly right. I mean, he still had a boss. Maybe we all do. His boss was Her Majesty the Queen, but he had a role as a father, and he had a role in bringing up Prince Charles. You know, he was bringing up a future king, and his grandson, also a future king. And his role was valued, and he was respected within the royal family because of that. He always stood beside the Queen, always knew his place in a manner of speaking, that he was there to support her.
Charlie, thank you. Now we're going to turn to longtime royal watcher. That's Tina Brown. She's the author of the Diana Chronicles. Good morning to you, Tina. I know you're joining us on the phone. You, too, are just hearing this news for the first time.
Yes, I am, indeed. Yeah. It's not unexpected, but, you know, nonetheless, extraordinarily sad and an enormous moment for the Queen, of course, and England, you know, because this is a man who was, he said when the Queen was crowned, he said that he knelt at her feet and he said he swore to be her liege lord for the days of his life. And that is what he was for the next, you know, 7 decades. He was at her side. He did support her all those years, even though he was such an enormously red-blooded alpha man. This was not your traditional handbag carrier, and yet Prince Philip really served, as he promised to, his country and his queen.
Yeah, you know, she called him her strength and her stay. So I can't imagine how she must be feeling today. Her longtime partner. This will also deeply affect her. What do you think? How do you think it'll affect her personally and professionally? Because she really relied on him.
She did. But for couple of years now, really, he's been fading. So she's had to sort of reckon without his enormously important input in all of the big decisions of her life. The interesting thing about it really was that she found a way, the Queen, to give him a role, and yet she depended on him so tremendously. She always knew that he would give her honest answers. She always knew that he was the one person who was her peer in the private realm, that she could say anything to him and he would tell her the truth. She's surrounded, obviously, by sycophants, by flunky news, by, you know, people who are always regarding her, of course, as Your Majesty. Philip was absolutely direct, absolutely honest, never, ever gave her anything but his best advice. And she really did depend on him for that. And yet, in the private realm, you know, she divided things in a very traditional way. See, one of the people who know her has once said to me, he runs the shoot, she brings the picnic. And that's what it was like in the private realm. She really did defer to him in the most sort of traditional marriage way. But, of course, she was also the Queen. So beyond that realm, he absolutely deferred to her.
Tina, what do you think his death now is likely to mean for the royal family and the way that, I mean, even that he has been fading in these last few years, he's still been a presence?
He's still been a presence. He was always a family enforcer. He was always the arbiter of the domestic side of everything in terms of running their private estates and indeed dealing with all the issues with the children a lot of the time, because he was the final decision maker. And there's no doubt that he was actually involved at the very end of Megxit. He was certainly consulted on that. That was happening at Sandringham, and Philip was there at Sandringham in the cottage that he preferred to live in on the grounds rather than in the big house, except when the Queen was there. So he was absolutely discussed everything with. He certainly was discussed. He discussed with Andrew, the whole crisis with Prince Andrew, with Jeffrey Epstein. there's no doubt that Prince Philip was involved in the Queen's decision to strip him of all of his public duties and royal duties. So she will definitely miss his presence. And I think the question now is who will the Queen turn to and rely on? She will probably rely more on her daughter, Princess Anne. And she's very close to her third son, Prince Edward. And his wife, Sophie Wessex, who she's become very fond of, actually. She's not immediate blood family, but she's a very warm and supportive woman who is willing to do the royal duties and so on. So she'll probably spend more time with them. But I think she'll be crushed, actually. I think she'll be extremely crushed. But being the Queen, you know, she will confront this as her mother confronted the death of the king, you know, and she will carry on. All right.
Tina Brown, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Our coverage of the death of Prince Philip will continue on CBS This Morning, on our streaming service CBSN, and on your local station. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Anthony Mason with Gail King and Tony DeCopel, CBS News, New York.
For news 24 hours a day, go to CBSNews.com.
The royal family has issued a statement moments ago reading, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty, the Queen, has announced the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle." The statement continues, "The royal family joined with people around the world in mourning his loss. Further announcements will be made in due course." Prince Philip was 99 years old, and Jean Robinson, he was the consort, longest-serving consort of any member of the royalty. 65 years he supported Queen Elizabeth. Buckingham Palace is saying he should be remembered for his support of the environment, science, technology, or will be saying that. And the Queen said on their 50th anniversary, I think it was in 1997, that Philip is my strength and stay. He tried to modernize the monarchy and did in many ways when he was the husband of the young Queen. Also known, Jean, though, for telling brusque, as NBC News says, brusque and crass jokes, and sometimes even racially insensitive comments made. Was often controversial, always, though, by her side, and tried to modernize the monarchy 50 years ago, 60 years ago.
Right, and I mean, his main job was supporting the Queen. I mean, and that was his job, really, his only job, supporting the Queen, supporting the monarchy, the continued existence and status and place of the monarchy in British life and British society, and that's what he did. And you have to, I think you have to say he did that well. He had an extraordinary life. Born, I believe, in Greece. He was kind of a stateless royal as a young man, as the royals got booted out of Greece, and he was without a name, really, and was kind of adopted by Lord Mountbatten in Britain, and that became his surname. And he was the great love, obviously, of Queen Elizabeth Elizabeth's life, but an important figure whose job was to be in the background and was not, when the times when he made news were mostly unfortunate because he was saying something crass or he was saying something kind of racist. This is years ago. His job really was to be more quiet, but to support the institution of monarchy, also to raise the Prince of Wales, the next monarch. Prince Charles is still the monarch in waiting, and to sort of form him into a future king, and we have to judge how well he did that job. He was interested in the environment. He had other interests, as the royals do. But his main job was a little bit, I think, as he called Elizabeth, she was his job.
And Jeffrey Goldberg is with us, with Atlantic's Jeffrey Goldberg. And by that measure, Jeffrey, the Duke of Edinburgh did, for the most part, judging by the Queen's own words, did his job very well. I remember a Maureen Dowd column on first spouses in the White House, and Maureen, I think, was saying that Pat Nixon was mocked because somebody had said that she made peanut butter jelly sandwiches for President Nixon, and that helped him get through the day. Maureen said, well, you know what? If that helps the person leading the country, then make more sandwiches. In this case, you look at just the remarkable sweep of time that Queen Elizabeth II and the Duke of Edinburgh were not only married, but were symbolic leaders of this country. It is absolutely stunning.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. We're going to have, as journalists in the coming hours, we're going to have a difficult time separating out what we think we know about him from the Crown versus what the reality might be. Although I think the broad strokes of shows like the Crown are true. Now, your point is very apt, especially now, right after this Meghan Harry controversy. I mean, I think what you're saying in so many words is that this is a man who did his duty for literally more than half a century, right? I mean, just plowed through duty, and as Jean pointed out, his job was to stay in the background and play a support role. And I'm fascinated by the idea that people today look at that as a kind of archaic behavior, and one could even see members of his own family looking at that kind of role and saying, not for me, which of course is a threat to the continuation of the monarchy. And this is just another, this sad event, this passing is just another sign that the British monarchy, the English monarchy, is moving into just an extraordinary period of transition. We don't know what's going to happen, but this is a really interesting moment to see if this institution is going to stay. You shouldn't bet against it. It's been around for quite a while, but it's a really highly symbolic moment.
And Joe, since Jeffrey mentioned the Crown, there's that vivid moment in one of the first 2 episodes of the entire series where Elizabeth and Philip are on tour in Kenya because King George is in poor health. They come back from a night at the Treetops Lodge, and it's actually Prince Philip himself who tells Elizabeth that her father has died and that she is now the Queen of England. That was in February of 1952. Obviously, their lives changing forever in that moment, but it was that man right there, Philip, who informed Elizabeth that she was the next Queen of England.
And the man who stood by her side through the years, through the precipitous decline of Great Britain, through the 50s and 60s and 70s, still staying by her side as Britain began to have an economic revival and began moving up as far as being an economic power and a strategic power on the globe, but then being buffeted by one family scandal after another. But he's the perfect example, and unfortunately, so many of our views are shaped by movies like The Queen or TV series like The Crown. But there is that telling moment where Queen Elizabeth repeatedly has to tell those around her that the most important job for them is when everybody wants members of the royal family to take a position, to do nothing, to say nothing, to sit back and not show approval to one side or the other for fear of being pulled into political battles, but to represent the ideal of the British people. And we've seen recently with Meghan and Harry just how difficult many people find that job to be. And I must say, at least, Mika, my impression from everything I've read about the family and everything that I've seen about the family, I suppose it's nice being called Queen or being called Prince, but it looks like an absolutely miserable job. And that is the one thing that The Crown has, my takeaway from The Crown, at the end of every season, I think, my God, I can't think of a worse position to be in, a worse fishbowl to be in.
Yeah, the most misunderstood position in life that anybody could have.
But kept his head down and did his duty and supported his queen.
We will be following this throughout the day on MSNBC. His Royal Highness Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, dead at the age of 99. Now to yesterday's developments in the trial of former